name is Chef Tim Bucci. I'm an instructor at Joliet Junior College. Coming here today to shoot a few videos on cooking while we're off during these times. A lot of us are trying to find some things to do. I'm showing you a few recipes today, things that you might have at your house. And I'm going to talk today about what to do if you don't have certain ingredients, and can you substitute certain ingredients, can you substitute herbs, and so forth. So looking to pass a little time making some lunch or dinner. First thing what we want to do is make sure that we wash our hands before we get started. Okay, and then the first recipe I'm going to demonstrate is pasta with fresh vegetables in a cream sauce with fresh basil and Parmesan cheese. And I'll show you that maybe if you don't want to use a cream sauce, what are some other alternatives and so forth. So I have all my ingredients over here right now. I've cut up everything just to make the time go a little bit faster for you. And I've already have my pasta that was already cooked, and I'll explain that a little bit later. So the first thing we're going to do, I have a kind of a medium saute pan, and I have it on a low to medium heat, and I'm going to add about a tablespoon of olive oil to this pan. Now, if you have canola oil, you can use that. If you have avocado oil or sunflower oil, you can use those as well. If you'd rather use butter, you can use butter, but you got to be careful with butter because it could burn on us. So first thing we're going to do, I have some zucchini diced up, and I don't peel my zucchini. I left it peel on. I always say it, if you peel a zucchini, it looks like a hairless cat. No offense for those who might have a hairless cat. We're going to add some zucchini, and we're going to add some diced red peppers. Now, if you don't like red peppers, you don't have to put red peppers in. If you have green peppers, you could put green peppers in. And these are just diced. The peel is still on. You might have jarred roasted red peppers. You can use that in here as well. And then we're going to add some broccoli. Now, this is raw broccoli florets. I just cut them into small pieces. They're not cooked. So if you have cooked, say, frozen florets, you would hold off on those and add those a little bit later after you get your vegetables already cooked. So what we're going to do is we're going to saute these vegetables. It's going to take about 5 minutes to get everything tender. We don't want things to be mushy. I am going to season them with a little salt. And this is sea salt. You can use kosher salt, or if you have iodized salt at home. And the reason I want to add salt now is I want to start developing some flavor, but also the salt is going to help pull out some moisture and start to break down these vegetables a little bit as well. And it's going to speed up that process of getting these vegetables cooked and tender. That was a little bit of black pepper I just put in. Okay, we're going to let those go. We're going to cover these. We don't want really that much color on these vegetables right now. We do want to let these cook for about 4 or 5 minutes until these vegetables get tender. We want to make sure the broccoli is tender. That's going to probably take the longest, but that's also why I cut the broccoli into small pieces. As I said earlier, if you have frozen broccoli, we're going to add those later. You can also use fresh peas, frozen peas or other frozen vegetables that you might have, carrots, cauliflower. You can certainly add some different vegetables. If you have eggplant, that's something that you could add, if you like eggplant. Now, if I had eggplant, that's something that I would probably peel because the peel can be a little tough. Now, we're going to cook these vegetables. They're going to take, like I said, about 4 or 5 minutes until they start to get tender. I don't mind it if there's a little bit of texture with the zucchini or the red pepper or even the broccoli, as long as it's not too hard. But I also don't like them mushy because then you're going to start losing some of those nutrients in the vegetables. After that, once these vegetables get cooked, we're going to add some garlic. And I just have a little bit of chopped garlic here, fresh garlic. If you don't have fresh garlic at home right now, you could even add a little bit of garlic, granulated garlic, but just a little bit. You got to be careful. I would add that towards the end of this process because that spice can burn if you're not careful. So occasionally we can just, give these a stir. If you can toss them, you can do that as well. All right, so that's smelling really good right now. And we're going to let those cook just for a little longer. Now, what I'm going to show you how to make is a little bit of a cream sauce for this. And we call this a bechamel sauce. Once we cook these vegetables, we're going to take these vegetables out. We're going to set them aside. We're going to add a little bit of butter to this pan. You can always add a little bit more olive oil in its place. And then we're going to add our flour, which we have measured. And this is actually some milk. I just used that to measure it out for this demonstration. Now, these vegetables are getting nice and soft and tender. Now, at this point, I'm going to add my garlic. And one thing we have to be careful with is that we don't burn our garlic here. So we're just going to let that cook for about a minute. And at this point, you don't have to cover it. We kind of covered it to facilitate the cooking of some of these vegetables, keeping some of that moisture in so they don't burn and they sweat a little bit and they'll become a little bit more tender. Now, once this garlic cooks for about a minute, we're going to go ahead and set this aside, and then we're going to go ahead and add our butter and flour to make our roux. Okay, so we're going to set that aside. I have just a bowl here. You can use a plate. And we want to make sure we get all that garlic out of there because we don't want that to burn as we go on. All right. Okay. Now, add a little bit of butter, and we want this to melt before we add our flour. And that's what we're going to make. That's what's going to thicken up this sauce. Now, if you were not going to use this cream sauce, you wanted to maybe cut down on the calories or you didn't have milk, you can use some of that pasta water that you cook the pasta in as a way to create a little bit of sauce because as that pasta cooks, it gives off starch into the water. So when you have that starchy water, you can use that in place of this cream sauce and use maybe a half a cup or even a cup of that water to add a little thickness to your vegetables and pasta. And then as that cooks down and thickens, it's going to coat the pasta. It's going to give you a little bit of a sauce in place of this, if you didn't want to make a cream sauce. So we cook this. This is called a roux. Okay, when you take some kind of fat, and in this case butter and flour, and mix that together and cook it. Now we're only going to cook this for about a minute to cook out some of the flour. And then we're going to add our milk, and we're going to add this slowly. We want to make sure that we break up any lumps in here. Now, I'm just using a rubber spatula. You can use a whisk, but be careful if you're using a whisk with a nonstick pan. You don't want to scratch that surface. I'm just going to go ahead and that's why I'm adding my milk a little at a time so that we don't get lumps. And before I add any more milk, I want to make sure that I break up these lumps as I go on. Okay. Now, if you feel like you still have some lumps, you can go ahead and use a whisk, but just be very careful, like I said, if you are using a nonstick pan. And I just want to go ahead and shake this around and break up that roux, that butter and flour mixture. before I add any more milk to this. Okay. All right. Okay, now that's getting a little smoother. And once we get all that milk incorporated, then we're going to let that cook for approximately 8 minutes to cook out any of that starchy flavor. Okay, we're going to add some more of our milk. And it's approximately 1.5 cups of milk. Now this is just 2% milk. You can use 1%. You can use whole milk. If you wanted to, you could use half and half, but if you're using half and half, you're going to add more fat to this. And again, this is traditionally called a bechamel sauce. Okay, so we want to make sure that we break up any lumps. And like I said, if you wanted to use a little whisk to break up those lumps, you can do so, but be very careful that you don't scratch your pan. Okay? All right. Okay, so once we get all that milk incorporated into here, we need to let that cook. And we're going to let that simmer for about 8 minutes because we want to cook out that flour, that roux, so it doesn't taste starchy. Now, you could still incorporate some of that pasta cooking liquid if you would like, just for flavor, because that's going to have flavor of the pasta. It's going to have some salt in there as well. So our sauce has been cooking for about 8 minutes now. We're going to add our pasta. Okay, we're going to add our pasta. And again, that's about maybe 3 or 4 cups of pasta that's been already cooked. We're going to add our vegetables back in. And then I'm going to add some fresh basil. And this is just basil that I tore. I didn't chop it. I want to keep the basil nice and green. So we can just tear that up a little bit. If you chop basil too much, it starts turning very dark. So we're just going to break that up. And I love a lot of fresh basil. If you want to add a little bit of dry oregano or dried basil, instead of the fresh, that would be fine also. We're going to add a little more pepper. Now, don't forget, we added some salt with the vegetables. We added some salt with the pasta, but I'm going to just add a little bit more. Okay, let's get that tossed. You can also just kind of stir it if you're not into and getting it all over the stove, but we can just go ahead and toss this. I also have some cheese, some Parmesan or Romano. You can add a little bit of cheddar cheese to your bechamel sauce before the pasta. If you wanted to add that, then you're kind of making almost like a homemade mac and cheese a little bit with that cheddar. I've even added American, in some cases, American cheese, right? Because kids do love American cheese. Okay, now if this is a little thick at this point, you can always add a little more milk, or you can always add a little bit of your pasta water if you save that. Okay, and then we're just going to sprinkle in some cheese. And this is grated Parmesan. You don't have to use cheese. Okay, oops. All right. And we're going to go ahead and plate some of this up. So we have our pasta with some fresh vegetables, a little cream sauce, and some Parmesan cheese. So this is enough for at least 2 people, if not more. And then we can add a little more Parmesan. If you have a little more fresh basil, you can just top that with a little bit more fresh basil as well. Okay. There we go. Fresh, some pasta with fresh vegetables, Parmesan, and fresh basil. Good. Guess I could taste it in the bowl, right? And I could be like a Rachel Ray or something like that, you know? Oh my God, it's so good. So let's try this. I want to get a little bit of the vegetables, a little bit of the cheese, basil. Very good. Now, if you wanted to add a little bit more salt to this based on your taste, or a little more pepper, you can always add a little bit before you take it out of the pan. But for me, that's pretty good. So enjoy.